Alright guys, so today is a good day. Today I'm going to start assembling the short block on the Subaru. This is a big step closer to getting the Subaru back on the road, so I'm really excited. If you take a look at the table here, I got everything that I need to assemble the short block at this point. My wrist pins, they didn't get oiled after they were done on machine work and they started to rust. So they kind of pitted and I need to get new ones. So I'm waiting on new wrist pins right now before I can put the pistons in. But so far I got rod bearings, crankshaft, rods, and the block. I can assemble this up till pistons pretty much. So right now I'm going to get started by putting the rod bearings in the rods and the crank bearings in the block. Now that I got the main bearings installed and the rod bearings installed, I can go ahead and put the rods on the crankshaft now. So Subarus and a lot of boxer motors, pretty much all boxer motors, they have what's called a split case design, and that's just saying that the case, the engine block, is split. So it's in two pieces rather than like a V8 or an inline motor where the block is all one piece. So this being the case, it requires you to install the rods, pistons, and crankshaft a different way. So with a V8 or an inline motor, you would connect the pistons to the rods first, and then you would put the crankshaft into the block, torque it down, and you would slide the pistons and rod assemblies in through the cylinders and then connect them to the crankshaft from the bottom. But with this design, there's no way to access the crankshaft bolts once they're installed because they'll be, front and back in line with the cylinders. So since that's the case, you have to put the rods on the crankshaft and then install the crankshaft rod assembly into the block. So Subaru made these little holes right here. These are service holes for you to stick the wrist pin in. Once you get the piston lined up in the cylinder, you can stick the wrist pin through the rod and the piston, and then that's how you get the pistons connected. And then you have to put a threaded plug in here to seal up those holes. So I got the rods bolted up to the crank, and I used a lot of assembly lube. So they don't spin as freely as they would with engine oil, but that's just because the assembly lube's thick. But they move freely, no grinding, no metal noise. And then the side clearance on them's good. So this is all good to go. So the next step that I have to do is I have to put some sealant on this block halve right here, and just kind of seal up all these edges and around all these holes right here, and then put some O-rings in. Then I could put some assembly lube on the main bearings and drop the crankshaft into that side, and then bring this side over and put it on top. So just a little thing to show you guys. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but let's see, cover up the light so it's not whitewashed. Okay, you see that little line that goes between the seam? You're supposed to line up that line when you put them together. That's the right side. So you can see on all of the rods, we got that line across the seam. So there you go. Now on the other side, there is no line. That's so that the bearings, they have this tang. There's a tang on the bearings, and you want the tang to be tang to tang. So you don't want the tang right here on one part of the rod and the tang on the other side. That's so that the tang are together. Now, the thing is too, is when you look at the front of the crankshaft, so this is the front, that's the back, on all of the rods, you want the tangs to be on the bottom of every single rod towards the front. That's just what Subaru does it from the factory, so it's a good idea to just do that when you're putting it together. Alright, so right now I'm just going to take some lacquer thinner, and I'm going to clean off the surfaces where the sealant is going to stick to. Just want to make sure that there's no oils or greases on the machine surfaces. So I'm just going to come through and give it a quick wipe with some lacquer thinner. So the only tricky part to sealing these blocks is you have to have oil around all of these main bearing bolt holes. So with these ones you can kind of keep it away pretty easy, but with these ones you kind of have to come through with like a Q-tip or a towel or something and clear it away from the bearing, so that when you put the blocks together it doesn't squeeze into the bearing areas. Alright, so I was kind of moving fast just so I could get this together, but when you do the torquing on these, I'll go over it real quick, but the torque specs on these are pretty complicated. But basically what you do is you get in all the bolts and you kind of get them, you kind of want to do this side first because there's a lot of bolts on the top, like right here and stuff. But you get the bolts in and you kind of bottom them out and just snug them up a bit, and then you flip it over to this side and you put in these bolts over here, and then you know, put those down to just snug. And then you come back to the front over here and you get your torque wrench, and that's over here. So I set it to 10 Newton meters. There's a, in the service manual it tells you the weights in foot-pounds and Newton meters, but this is a Newton meter wrench, so I just use Newton meters. But I set it up to 10 Newton meters, and then you go in an order sequence that they give you. So what the order is you torque this one down, then you torque this one down, then you torque this one down, then you come down here, torque that bolt down, torque this bolt down, and then you come to the back, and you can't really get a torque wrench on this guy, but you just, you know, get it tight, you know, use your arm to gauge what it's doing, and then you do this one. Now we're going to do the main bolts. So you start off with this one, and now you come down, torque that one, go back over here, torque this one, come back over here, torque that one. Now we switch to the other side, and we torque this one, and then we torque this one, then we torque this one, then we come over here and torque this one, and then we come over here, torque this one, and then we torque this top one up here. And then that's the sequence. So then it gives you some different specs to go through that whole order again, but you save these outside ones for last. But you come back here and you torque these to 20 Newton meters, and these ones to 15 in the same sequence I showed you before. And then once you're done with that, you come back here, same sequence as before. These 4 bolts get torqued to 20, and then these two get torqued to 18. And then once you do that, then it asks you to do that same sequence as before, but you rotate all the bolts 90 degrees. So you start here and you do a quarter of a turn, then you go down to this guy, do a quarter of a turn, then you go back to here, do a quarter of a turn, and you know, you do the same procedure with that same sequence. And then you come through here and you torque all these bolts in the sequence I showed you before to 25 Newton meters. And like I said before, I just got that tight with a wrench. And then there's a bolt on the bottom here, I'll show you in a second, that you just put to 4 foot-pounds, so that's just barely snug. You don't want to give it too much to strip it out. And as you can see, the way I applied the gasket, you have a little bit of ooze out, but that's just enough. And I'm assuming that there's this much on the inside, so that shouldn't cause any issues. But I'm going to take a rag and just wipe up all this excess squeeze out. But overall, it looks pretty good. It looks like I got good coverage on the sealant. Alright guys, so that's it for this video. I got it all together minus the pistons. I'll probably do that in a separate video. But I cleaned up the block a little bit, got some of the squeeze out cleaned up. But everything looks real nice. I got as much of the squeeze out from the inside as I could, but there's some stuff I can't reach, like the opposite side of this. It's not too much though. I don't think it'll cause a problem. I've seen people like squeeze a bunch in there, and then when they put the blocks together, there's like huge chunks of it. So you could assume that that's on the inside too. So mine's not nearly that bad. So it should all be good to go. But yeah, just the next steps to put the pistons in, seal up these holes, and the short block will be done. Then I can put it on the engine stand and get the long block assembled. And we're going to get really close to putting this in the car. So I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, leave a like. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you aren't subscribed, please consider subscribing. We're getting really close to finishing this up. I'm getting really excited for it. So stay tuned for those next videos. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.